should probably start with an apology for my regular subscribers. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, hence the reason that I'm struggling to get these videos out. Certainly doesn't help living in a house with a really loud air conditioner and having 40 degrees temperatures here in Bendigo. So I can't record when it gets that hot because I can't turn off the aircon. I will do my best to try and get some of these done earlier in the day before it gets too hot so that I can get them out more frequently. So apologies for the absence over the last couple of weeks. I will try and get these out a bit earlier, get a few more out. I must admit I had wanted to do one on the 50th anniversary of the Tasman Bridge going down in Tasmania, but that happened to coincide with some really hot days, plus some other family commitments, and well, it just went out the window. So instead I'm looking at this video done by a channel called Chasing Dane. This video is about a year old, and I suspect that he's now left Australia. Now, to be fair, he did originally make a video on 10 things he liked about Australia. But I will come back and have a look at that one at another time. This one, I wanted to look at 10 things that he hates about living in Australia. There's a few things here that sort of, had me raising my eyebrows a bit, and I had a few things to say about it, so I thought this was probably an interesting one to do. Once again, I'll put the link for the original video in the description so that if you wish, you can go and watch it over on his channel. If you want to go subscribe to him, that way you're over there. If you want to hit like on his video if you like it, same again. If you want to leave him a comment, same again. That said, I love when people leave comments in my videos. Not only does it give me some idea of what you're thinking of these videos, but it also gets these videos out into the algorithm. I'm also going to ask, I'd dearly love to try and get my subscriber count up and get more people seeing these videos. So if you are new to my channel, I'd love if you would subscribe. Anyway, let's just jump into this video.
Hi friends, welcome to another video. My name is Dane. I post videos all about Australia and how to move here on a working holiday visa. In this video, I'm going to be discussing 10 things that I hate, not necessarily hate, but 10 things that I dislike about living in Australia. I just posted another video called 10 Things I Love About Living in Australia. I just want to preface this by saying I'm not dogging on Australia at all. People learn from my experiences of living in this country. For further context, I'm an English person. I'm 29. I moved to Australia 2 years ago on a working holiday visa, but I haven't lived in the UK in 3 years. Yeah, I do love it here, but obviously there's things that we don't necessarily like about all countries, and that is okay. So I thought, this is a good, interesting topic for you guys to learn about things that I don't like about living in Australia.
He seems fairly genuine, but I will say I've just edited out a self-advertisement that he did. It seems that this is another one of those channels that is all about selling people things for helping them move to Australia. So he was advertising an ebook and stuff like that. Stuff that's totally irrelevant to what we're talking about here.
These things are not in any particular order. They are completely random. I just sat down and wrote a list of like 10 things I don't like and 10 things I do like about living in Australia. So these are those 10 things. Number one is Australia is not very walkable. I've found that I really struggled living here without a car, and now I have a car. It's much easier to get around because the distances are just huge. And if you're not in major cities, the public transport kind of sucks.
I think that is largely dependent on where you end up. I think definitely in Tasmania, you wouldn't want to even consider living in any regional areas in Tasmania unless you had your own car, because chances are there's going to be 1 or 2 buses a day. It's going to take you forever to get anywhere, and it's going to be very limited where you can go. I'd imagine that there's a lot of other regional areas in Australia that are similar, but at least in most other states you do have a fairly decent infrastructure in terms of trains. I know here in Victoria, even from Bendigo, it's actually easier to get down to Melbourne by train than it is by car, because you don't have to deal with the traffic. Takes possibly less time to get to like Central Station or one of the bigger stations in Melbourne, going all the way by train rather than driving part way, parking and catching a train the rest of the way. But obviously there's going to be other areas in every state, I guess, that are a bit more regional, a bit less well serviced perhaps. That said, I think logically, if you were someone moving to Australia from another country and you didn't have a license or you weren't planning on buying a vehicle, then you probably should consider moving into a less regional area. You should probably look at public transport when choosing where you are going to live.
Within this as well, this is going to be controversial, so don't come for me, please. This is just based on my personal experiences, and maybe it's just where I live. I thought it was a me thing, and then my family spent a month here, and my best friend spent like 3 weeks here, and they felt the same as me. They said, let's blame them. They said, people in Australia don't know how to drive. That's what they said. Don't shoot the messenger. But yeah, I feel that drivers here are a bit crazy. You know, everyone's driving around in their big 4x4s, and honestly, I have, like, as everyone does, I get anxious sometimes. I am such an anxious driver because, like, just being a driver in Australia, like, people do stupid shit. Like, they just, like, weave in and out of traffic, or they just, like, absolutely bomb it, or they just suddenly brake, or they don't indicate, they just pull out of anywhere, and it happens every single time I get in the car. I'm not even joking. Like, you know, no one's perfect at driving, but I've driven in so many countries around the world, but I've just noticed that people in Australia, oh my God, I don't know how they pass their driving tests. No offense, Australia. Love you people. Don't love you driving.
Okay, so apologies to my subscribers from the greater Sydney area, but I'm going to guess that that's possibly where he's living, because my experience of driving the entire East Coast is the one place where I really become super anxious is from the outskirts of Sydney through Sydney up to north of Sydney. Like, that is hellish driving. And yeah, I have found that in that area there are some of the most aggressive drivers in Australia. That said, I get frustrated when someone is only familiar with one part of Australia and generalises the whole of Australia, because I can tell you that while we've got some utter twits here in Bendigo, the majority of drivers here are pretty decent people who know the road rules, observe the road rules, and I don't get anxious driving here in Bendigo. Melbourne, yeah, there's a few idiots down there, but same again, it doesn't come close to Sydney. I think there's a few, when you look at Sydney and Melbourne, they're the 2 largest population centres in Australia. So yes, you are going to have heavy traffic, you're going to have moron drivers, but let's be fair, I think that there's plenty of places in the world that have drivers who would probably be on par with some of our idiot drivers. That said, I think largely there's a lot of really damn good drivers in Australia, and I resent being lumped into the same bucket as all the morons who are bad drivers or aggressive drivers. So I think I would have preferred him to have done a little bit more research here. Or at least to have said, this is the area where I live. In this area, I don't like the drivers. Rather than making it that whole global Australian drivers can't drive. Because, yep, you've just lost some major points with me, dude.
Sorry. Number 2, the weather here can be very extreme. So mostly it's blue skies and it's pretty warm where I live. However, when it rains, like it really rains. Prime example, when I first moved here, I think it was during the La Nina period, so there was like extreme rainfall. Shit you not, I moved to Australia for the good weather. It rained for 3 months straight. And I'm not talking a little bit of rain like we have in England, like buckets of rain. There was floods. It was insane. Like you'd step into the road and your foot is just like submerged. Like every day I'd walk to work and my feet would just be like submerged into water. And I'm like, wait, I have wet socks all day now. So yeah, I love the country and the weather mostly, but it just can be so extreme sometimes, like more extreme than the UK.
Okay, well that makes it sound more like he's in like Queensland somewhere. I'm trying to think back to if this video is a year old and he said he'd been here, so this is about 3 years ago he's talking about with the weather. I think that's when we were having all those nasty floods and everything. But again, it's a regional thing. Sure, we get some pretty damn hot weather over summer, but can we acknowledge that Australia has multiple climates? So again, if you're coming to Australia, do your research, figure out the climate that's going to suit you best. As for the extremes versus, being far worse than England, aren't they like under a pile of snow at the moment? It's one thing that we don't have so much of here other than in the alpine regions. So I think it's all relative. It's just different types of weather extremes.
Number 3, and I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to this, is Australia is so far away. I hate that if I want to go home, it would take a day. It would take $2,000, well, probably more than that. And I just don't get to spend much time with my family or friends. Like I left the UK 3 years ago. I traveled for like a year and then I moved to Australia. So I'm used to being away. My family and friends are used to me being away. But still, I have this like daily guilt of, oh God, I feel like I'm missing out on like special time with my friends and family. Like I still speak to them a lot, but when you're like, I'm 11 hours ahead from the UK right now. So that means I'm generally asleep when my family and friends are awake and vice versa. So it makes it really difficult to communicate and it's just really far away. Like I said, I couldn't get further away if I tried.
Okay, but if you're here on a working visa, it's not like you're wanting to pop back home to England every weekend so that you fly from like Friday night through till Saturday night or whatever, Saturday morning. Have a couple of hours with your family and fly back to Australia. At the most, you might head back once every couple of years. If it's such a problem for you being that far away from family, then maybe moving to Australia isn't the greatest choice. That said, I do get quite weary of hearing people talking about the difficulty of communicating with people in the UK because of the time difference. Sure, 11 hours seems like a huge time difference, but that just means figuring out a time, like, you don't sleep for 13 hours of the day, do you? So it's not like they're going to be completely asleep the whole time that you're completely awake, and vice versa. I'm sure you can find a suitable time to communicate, even if it is only on weekends because you have to leave for work of a morning and you don't get a chance. Or if you're really that desperate to speak to friends and family, get up half an hour early and do a Skype call or a FaceTime with them. It is doable. I know a lot of people who have moved to Australia from the UK and they make it work quite easily.
This next one kind of lives up to the stereotype, but not too much. So, coming to Australia, I was like, I know there's going to be bugs and spiders, etc. Haven't really seen many spiders. Had like one in my apartment, but it's the other things like bugs, cockroaches, and birds. I had a bird fly into the apartment the other day and it shit all over the living room, it shit on the kitchen floor, and there was feathers everywhere. And this is not the first time it's happened, but it's just a bit traumatizing. And the birds like sit on the balcony and they swoop here. So like I have like been nearly swooped so many times. You have to like sort of duck and run away from the bird, and it's actually really scary. The other thing is cockroaches. Every single place that I have lived in Australia and many places that I've traveled to, like accommodation wise, cockroaches. Cockroaches is a very normal part of life in Australia. Even my apartment now, it's on the 3rd floor, it's very clean, it's new, but I still get cockroaches sometimes. That is just a part of living in Australia. No matter how clean you are, you're going to get cockroaches.
Okay, I think we can all agree with the magpies. They can be pretty damn aggressive when they get upset with you. Someone probably needs to explain to him about how to cope with magpies and changing the route that you walk, because chances are it might be nesting somewhere nearby. Um, but I certainly can feel for him. As for that magpie getting into his apartment, that's a bit of an irregularity. I can't help wondering if someone may have previously lived in that apartment and struck up a friendship with that magpie, because magpies do get to know people and they're actually really super intelligent birds. So I'm kind of thinking there's probably a reason for that magpie going into his apartment. But also, can we just acknowledge you probably want to have your screen door shut at the very least to keep bugs and stuff out. So if you've got a bird flying into your apartment, that's all the more reason to have the door shut. If there isn't a sliding screen door, then you probably need to talk to your landlord about that if you live in a warmer climate area, particularly if you're having issues with cockroaches. I have to say, that is one of the things about the northern part of Australia that I don't like. I had never encountered cockroaches until the first time I went to, I think it would have been Queensland. I saw them for the first time and I was like, ew, gross. And it seems that they are a warm weather critter, and all these notions of cockroaches being in filthy areas, no, apparently places like Sydney and Queensland, they're everywhere. So I can sympathise with him on the cockroaches and the birds. I can also say he's pretty lucky not to have too many spiders cropping up around the place.
Number 5. Now, I don't know if this is a me thing, but I find that the fresh produce here just doesn't last very long. Now, I remember way back when, like 3 years ago, when I lived in the UK, I used to do like food shopping once a week, and that would last me the whole week. In Australia, I go to the supermarket every day, if not every other day, because I'll put strawberries in the fridge or I'll buy fruit and veg, and then it only lasts like a day or two before it goes rotten.
Well, I think I would be actually buying my fruit and veg elsewhere. If it's not lasting that long, definitely there's a problem. I'd be looking around for a decent fruit and veg shop rather than buying it from the supermarket. And I'm guessing that perhaps this has got something to do with the fact that he's in the north of Australia and maybe things are being left out for longer in the supermarkets. I don't know. But I certainly haven't had a lot of issues with stuff not lasting when I buy it.
Number 6, this is a really big thing for me because I'm a very social person. I find it extremely difficult to find community and friends in Australia. So I live in like a local town. There's not many tourists, not many travelers come through here, which means everyone has their established friendship groups because they've lived here their whole life. So it can be difficult for someone like me, not from this country, to try and integrate myself into new friendship groups. When I lived in Sydney, I found it extremely easy to make friends because it's a very transient city, so people are coming and going all the time. But in the same cycle, people are leaving. So you make some really good friends and then they piss off. And it's just like, wow, nice knowing you, buddy.
Well, I guess some regional areas can be a little bit more close knit, and if you have moved to a regional area with a smaller population and you're not putting yourself out there, then yeah, you may feel a bit lonely. But I think, you've got to put yourself out there. So it means joining a club, finding a group of like minded people. And if it's in a regional area, it may just be about going to the local pub on a Friday night, and chances are you may start to get to know the locals that way. I know a lot of smaller towns, that's the hub basically. Half the town ends up going to the local pub on a Friday night or a Saturday night just to socialise. So, yeah, it does. I think it comes down to putting yourself out there. People aren't going to come to you and offer you friendship. You've got to put yourself out there if that's what you so desire.
Number 7. Now this is a love and hate. I love like all the cool places there are to visit in Australia, but Australia travel is fucking expensive. It's so expensive. So to get to the other side of Australia, so Perth, for instance, it's about a 5-hour flight and it costs like £300 to £400 return. Now, when I was living in the UK, I could fly to America for that. I could fly to Asia. Here, I fly that distance and I'm still in Australia and it costs me the same amount of money. So I'm used to it now, like flights on the East Coast, pretty cheap. But if you want to fly anywhere other than the East Coast, it's going to cost you money. And even things like hotels, camper vans, just a bit more expensive, but it's fine because, I find that all the experiences I've had in Australia, like travel-wise, have been second to none. Like I've never really been disappointed with any of my travel experiences in Australia.
Okay, just because it's still in Australia doesn't mean it's not a decent distance. And I think the difference here is that you have fewer people making that trip, so it is going to cost the companies more money to put those flights on. They're going to have smaller planes than what you would have going from the UK to the US, fewer flights, so they've got to make their money out of the smaller planes and the fewer flights. So that's understandable. In terms of the general cost of travel in Australia, I think it's much of a muchness. I think having done it as a road trip, like the East Coast, didn't find it to be too prohibitively expensive. I have noticed lately, though, that in terms of hotels, cabin accommodation, etc. Ever since COVID, they've gone up in price and stayed up in price. So I think it is becoming more expensive to travel in Australia. That said, there's options. There's affordable options. There's lots of camping places that you can go to. You don't have to have a camper van. You don't have to stay in a hotel. There's definitely options, and there's even some really good quality, like backpacker style hostels that aren't scummy hostels like you would think of, but are places where you can actually get a private room, but they're just more of a sort of backpacker style place. So I think it's about doing your research. And yeah, some areas in terms of flights can be a bit expensive, but I don't think they're that bad, are they?
Number 8, it is really difficult to stay in Australia. So a lot of Brits, they come to Australia, they fall in love with the lifestyle, which is literally what happened to me. And then you're like, right, okay, how do I stay here? There's a million visa options. It's just really expensive. Like me, for instance, I'm currently on my 2nd year working holiday visa. Now, one of my only options to stay is to do a skilled visa, which is going to cost probably $8,000 to $9,000, and it includes getting paperwork from like years ago and just all this documentation. And it's like, I feel like they make it really hard for you to stay in Australia. And if you're an expat in Australia, you know what I mean. Like everyone I meet that is not Australian, I'm like, what visa are you on? How long have you been on that visa? Any tips? Do you have an immigration agent? Like that's just such a normal conversation. And it's so funny because I've never lived this experience before of like living fully in another country where you're having visa issues. Everyone's got a visa issue.
Okay, I can sympathise, but at the same time, Australia is such a popular place for people to want to move to, for people to come here for working holidays. Now, I can't tell you the statistics off the bat, but I know that in terms of the number of people living in Australia who are on visas, the number is actually quite huge. And when you look at that, alongside the current housing crisis in Australia, there are so many Australians who, at this point in time, don't have somewhere to live. And we're not talking about just people who are homeless because they have no money. We're talking about entire families who, for some reason or another, have been forced to move out of wherever they were living and are struggling to find somewhere new to live, and are forced to live in tents or sleep on couches in other people's houses. This is a huge problem at the moment in Australia, and it is touching all levels of society. So while I can appreciate that there's people who really have come to Australia on a visa and they want to stay here and they want it to be made easy for them, I think the old adage of charity starts at home should also apply to basically looking after your own. While we have this massive housing problem in Australia, then I think it does need to be made difficult for people to get long-term visas. We need to be focusing more on getting Australians into their own living arrangements rather than living in tents somewhere or living out of their cars. When you have whole families that are homeless, then something's got to give. And if that means making it really hard for people from overseas to get visas, so be it.
Number 9, it's a given, the sun. I love the sun because I'm a warm weather guy, but it scares me. I have traveled all around the world and never had any serious burns, fingers crossed. However, in Australia, even if it's like a cloudy day, you're still gonna get burned. I don't know if this is just my skin, like I've got a bit of a tan. I don't really, well, before I moved to Australia, I didn't really burn easily, but being here, I can like look at the sun and it'll be like, bam, red. Step outside, bam, red. I'll be driving to the shop, bam, red. It's really annoying. So I feel like I'm constantly, like I have sunscreen by the door. Every time I leave the house, I put sunscreen on because I'm like so paranoid. I've had a few burns, like I'll show you in a second. I don't know if you can see, my nose here is like a bit red. And my chest. It's just always red. I don't know why. So yeah, I really dislike that I have to put sunscreen on every time I leave the house, and I'm really scared to get burnt because there's no ozone layer over Australia, and that is why the sun is so powerful.
Okay, can we please do away with this myth about there being no ozone layer over Australia? The simple truth is that because of Earth's axis, during the summer months, Australia is closer to the sun. We are the skin cancer capital of Australia. Dude, buy yourself a hat. Don't just put your sunscreen on as you go out the door. You need to reapply. If you're burning that easily, you need to be wearing long sleeve tops. I know it's warm, but lightweight cotton long sleeve tops, at least you're not going to burn. But you know, it's the way of it. And if it bothers you that much, head south, move to a state that doesn't get quite so bad. That said, even in Tasmania over the summer months, it doesn't have to be hot. The UV rating can still be very, very high. And yes, you can get badly sunburned on a cloudy day. It's because of the high UV rating. So it comes down to learning to live a sun-smart lifestyle. And I guess for Australians, we're used to that. But I think there's a lot of people who come to Australia who just don't understand that. And there are so many of these YouTubers I see that have come to Australia and they are getting sunburnt and not realising how much damage they're doing themselves. Or they're getting annoyed because Australians, just because we care and we understand how much damage the sun can do, they get Australians commenting on their videos telling them to wear sunscreen, put on a hat, etc. And they get annoyed with people for saying that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to come to Australia and you don't want to end up with skin cancer, then it's the old slip, slop, slap. You know, wear a hat, wear sunscreen, wear sunnies. And if you're still getting sunburn on your nose, go buy some zinc cream. Go back to the 80s. Oh, that was a joke. But, you know, if you're wearing a hat with a fairly wide brim, you're not going to get a sunburnt nose. And I'm guessing that if you're getting sunburn around the front of your chest, that you should probably stop wearing that tank top and wear something with a higher neckline. It's you know, common sense, really.
And number 10, something we can all probably relate to at the moment, the cost of living here is high. And I'm not talking like that high, but it's kind of a lot higher. When I first moved here, I was like, oh my God. Like I was like, I don't think I can afford to live here because these prices are insane. I'm a lot used to things now, but when you move here, you'll have this initial 3-month shock period where every time you go to the store, you'll have full-blown anxiety over how much you're spending on food. Some things are cheaper here. So like petrol is half the price here. I think it's like $1.70 per liter. So that's about 75, 80p in British. But things, and oh yeah, and energy bills are cheaper. Rent's kind of the same, but food is a lot more expensive. And cleaning products. So I feel like this is the biggest scam of Australia, dishwasher tablets. I don't know why, but they are so expensive. Like they do these stupid deals where they're like 50% off on dishwasher tabs, only $28, reduced from like $70. But I'm like, how do dishwasher tabs cost so much money? It is absolutely insane. So yeah, that's kind of one thing that is a bit triggering about living in Australia, is like some things are very expensive and it's very annoying.
I was in Woolies the other day, and I kid you not, a block of chocolate was $7. I couldn't believe it. Or you can get two for 12. The prices here of groceries are just insane. Now that said, we do have way cheaper energy bills from everything I've heard. Definitely way cheaper fuel costs. But I guess from his perspective, he said that he didn't have a vehicle, I think. So perhaps that doesn't factor into his regular budget. I'm wondering if he perhaps doesn't have an Audi nearby, because things are so much cheaper at Audi. Um, I'm a bit blown away by the cost of those dishwasher tablets. Surely there's got to be ones that are way cheaper than that. I don't have a dishwasher in this house. I just do my dishes by hand. I buy my washing up liquid from Aldi, so it's super cheap, works brilliantly, lasts long enough. You know, the great thing with Aldi is that they periodically have the big bulk things of laundry, laundry detergent and of dishwashing detergent, and you just buy them when they have the bulk ones available, and you save a fortune. But yes, Woolies and Coles, and this is 12 months ago even, they seem to be still unchecked in terms of prices, and really the government's not doing a lot about it. So yes, I would say definitely groceries are expensive right now. I don't know how they compare with the UK. He said he hadn't been in the UK for 3 years, so it's possible that he may not be aware of increased prices in the UK as well, because we know that this is a global thing, this is not just Australia. But yeah, to be honest, my local IGA, most of the things there are now cheaper than Coles or Woolies for me. So the bulk of my groceries come from IGA and Aldi. And then there's only one or two things that I can't get at those two places that I then get from Coles. So yeah, I think he's not too far off with that one. I think overall, I think this video was quite a reasonable assessment of things in Australia. I think in terms of, there's a few things where I disagreed with him. I didn't like him saying that the whole of Australia couldn't drive. I don't like when people deal in generalisations like that. I get frustrated when people come up with this notion of Australia having no ozone layer. No, that's not the case. And really listen to locals. They will tell you how to look after your skin, how to avoid getting sunburnt. It can suck sometimes in summer when the sun is that strong, but It's about learning how to look after yourself. Yeah, overall, I didn't think this was a bad video. Like I've said, there was a few things where I was a little bit frustrated with his perspective, but I also understand his perspective. So I don't think he was unreasonable. I certainly wouldn't say that he was being overly critical. I think it was just his perspective probably differed a little bit from my perspective. So that brings us to the end. Thanks for listening. If you are new, like I said before, please subscribe to my channel. Also, please hit the like button. Help me get these videos out there into the algorithm and seen by more people. And leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.